The dawn of February 20th, 1943, broke over Guadalcanal with a sound that would echo through marine history. 800 Japanese soldiers erupted from the dense jungle undergrowth, their voices joining in a unified scream that seemed to shake the earth itself. Sergeant James McKinley held his shotgun steady, watching the enemy close in through the choking vegetation of the Solomon Islands. The distance collapsed rapidly. 50 yards became 40, then 30. The rifle he'd carried for months suddenly felt inadequate, too slow to cycle, too narrow in its destructive capability. Every Marine knew the brutal mathematics of what came next. A frontal charge moved at roughly 10 miles per hour, and once that enemy line broke through your position, everything came down to chance rather than training. But McKinley wasn't gripping an M1 Garand that morning. Slung across his chest was something the Marine Corps had nearly written off as obsolete. A World War I trench gun, a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun that hadn't seen serious combat since the French trenches a quarter-century earlier. Military experts had dismissed it as useless for modern warfare. As the Japanese soldiers burst through the final stretch of vegetation, McKinley raised this forgotten weapon from the Great War. What unfolded in the next minutes would force the Marine Corps to completely reconsider their jungle warfare tactics. 3 weeks earlier, when McKinley first received the shotgun, doubt had gripped him. The weapon felt strange after months of trusting the M1's precision and range. Lieutenant Colonel Pearson had distributed these guns after studying casualty reports from previous close-quarter encounters, but skepticism ran deep among the men. The pump mechanism seemed clumsy next to the smooth operation of their rifles. The limited ammunition capacity troubled everyone. 5 shells in the shotgun compared to 8 rounds in a rifle magazine felt like stepping backward. Now, on this humid February morning, McKinley's squad had dug in along a ridge, overlooking a narrow valley choked with mahogany trees and thick jungle growth. The air hung heavy and wet. Distant artillery rumbled in the background, while birds called out overhead, and leaves rustled constantly around them, creating a false sense of normalcy. Private Harrison, a 19-year-old from Ohio, sat methodically cleaning his assigned trench gun with the same care he'd once given his rifle. He'd adapted faster than most to the weapon, but even he wondered silently whether 5 shells would suffice when the Japanese came. The first warning arrived as it always did, through silence. The birds stopped singing. The insects went quiet. McKinley had spent 8 months in the Pacific learning to read these signs, and he immediately signaled his men to prepare. Corporal Daniels, positioned 20 yards to the left, acknowledged with a nod and chambered a round in his trench gun. The metallic sound of the pump action cut sharply through the stillness. Through his binoculars, McKinley spotted movement in the tree line 400 yards down the slope. Individual figures emerged from the shadows, disciplined and precise, Japanese soldiers advancing with the coordination that always preceded their charges. He counted them methodically, 50, then 70, then over 100. The enemy spread across a front nearly 200 yards wide, broader than anything his squad had faced before. Each soldier carried an Arisaka rifle with fixed bayonet, their synchronized movement revealing this would be another coordinated assault like those that had broken American lines throughout the campaign. McKinley's radio crackled with reports from adjacent positions. Similar formations were moving into position along the entire ridge, a coordinated attack involving at least 800 soldiers. The numbers twisted his stomach. His 12-man squad faced roughly 60 charging enemies, manageable odds under normal circumstances with good fields of fire and adequate ammunition. But the dense jungle limited visibility to less than 50 yards most directions, and his men carried only 25 rounds per person for their trench guns, compared to the 80 rounds typically issued for M1 rifles. The charge began with the traditional battle cry that had terrified Americans since Pearl Harbor. 800 voices screaming in unison created a sound that seemed to make the ground itself vibrate. McKinley watched through his field glasses as the Japanese surged forward at practiced speed, reaching effective range in less than 2 minutes. Enemy soldiers ran in loose formations, weaving between trees and using terrain to compress their approach. Their training showed in their spacing, preventing concentrated fire from breaking momentum. Harrison called out range estimates as the charge closed. 300 yards and closing fast, Sergeant. The private's voice remained steady despite his youth, a testament to how quickly combat aged men. McKinley could see individual faces now, young men barely older than Harrison, their features twisted with the fanatical determination that made Banzai charges so terrible. These weren't acts of desperation, but calculated tactical decisions designed to exploit American weaknesses in close combat. At 200 yards, McKinley ordered his men to prepare for engagement. Marines shifted behind fallen logs and natural depressions, checking weapons one final time. The trench guns felt primitive compared to the approaching tide of bayonets and screaming voices. McKinley had witnessed these charges before and understood the critical moment would come at 50 yards, where rifle accuracy became meaningless and survival depended on devastating rapid firepower. Daniels had positioned himself at a natural choke point, where terrain funneled the attacking force into a corridor barely 30 yards wide. The veteran corporal understood the tactical advantage, but also knew concentrated enemy fire would find him quickly once shooting began. His trench gun held 5 shells loaded with 9 pellets each, 45 projectiles that would spread in a cone roughly 10 feet wide at close range. The mathematics suddenly felt more favorable than with a rifle. The charge reached 100 yards, and McKinley heard individual voices cutting through the collective screaming. Japanese soldiers stumbled over roots and crashed through undergrowth, but momentum never wavered. Some carried satchel charges designed to destroy positions, while others wielded swords alongside rifles. The psychological impact was immediate and intentional. Several of McKinley's newer Marines showed visible panic, their hands shaking as they gripped unfamiliar shotguns. At 75 yards, the enemy formation concentrated as jungle terrain forced them into predictable approach routes. McKinley realized the dense vegetation that seemed disadvantageous was actually working in his favor. Japanese soldiers could only advance along certain paths, creating natural kill zones his trench guns could dominate. He adjusted positioning orders, directing Harrison and 2 others to cover the main approach, while Daniels held the secondary route. The final 50 yards passed in seconds. McKinley raised his trench gun and flicked off the safety, feeling the unfamiliar weight compared to his rifle. The weapon that had seemed so primitive during training was about to face its ultimate test against an enemy tactic that had broken American defenses throughout the Pacific. Everything conventional warfare doctrine taught was about to prove inadequate. His survival would depend entirely on this forgotten relic from the trenches of France. Then came the first shot. As the lead Japanese soldier burst through undergrowth at 40 yards, McKinley squeezed the trigger. The 12-gauge shell launched 9 lead pellets in a spreading pattern that caught not just his intended target, but 2 soldiers running alongside. All 3 dropped instantly, their charge broken by a weapon McKinley had dismissed as obsolete moments before. The pump action mechanism cycled smoothly despite the humidity, chambering a fresh shell faster than he could have reloaded his Garand. Harrison opened fire from his position near the main trail, and the sound was unlike anything these Marines had experienced. The sharp crack of rifle fire was replaced by the thunderous boom of shotguns, each blast echoing through the jungle like artillery. The psychological effect on charging Japanese soldiers was immediate and devastating. Men trained to absorb rifle casualties suddenly faced a wall of scattered projectiles where individual accuracy meant nothing. Harrison's second shot caught 4 soldiers clustered together, pellets spreading across a cone nearly 15 feet wide at 30-yard range. The jungle environment that had frustrated American forces throughout the Pacific suddenly became their greatest tactical advantage. Dense vegetation that blocked rifle bullets at range proved no obstacle to shotgun pellets at close quarters. Mahogany branches that deflected aimed shots merely scattered buckshot patterns, creating ricochet effects that struck Japanese soldiers from unexpected angles. McKinley watched, amazed, as his third shot penetrated through a screen of leaves and vines that would have stopped his rifle round completely. Striking 2 enemies he could barely see through the foliage. Daniels held position at the secondary approach, where terrain created a natural funnel. His first engagement came when 6 Japanese soldiers rounded a cluster of fallen trees at 25 yards. The veteran corporal fired twice in rapid succession, his pump action cycling with practiced precision. The shells held double-aught buckshot, each pellet roughly the diameter of a .38 caliber bullet. At close range, the effect was catastrophic. The tight jungle path forced all the attackers into a concentrated kill zone, and within mere seconds, 6 enemy soldiers lay motionless on the ground. What happened in those moments changed everything about how this battle would unfold. McKinley had spent his previous engagements doing things the traditional way, controlling his breathing, squeezing the trigger with precision, making careful shots from distances well over 100 yards away. The shotgun stripped away all that complexity. At ranges under 50 yards, what mattered wasn't careful aim. It was pointing the weapon and pulling the trigger as fast as possible. His fourth shot came almost on instinct, fired at nothing more than a muzzle flash flickering somewhere in the thick undergrowth ahead. The buckshot spread out in a wide pattern and found its mark even through vegetation so dense that a rifle bullet couldn't have reached anything. Back during the briefing, Lieutenant Colonel Pearson had handed out 25 shells to each man, and it seemed like wasteful overkill at the time. Now McKinley understood why Pearson had made that call. Every single shotgun shell packed multiple pellets inside it. That meant each pull of the trigger sent dozens of projectiles downrange instead of just one. His magazine held 5 rounds, which meant he was essentially delivering 45 individual projectiles, roughly the same number as an entire 8-round rifle magazine. The extra ammunition gave him the freedom to keep shooting without having to ration every single round the way you had to with a rifle. Pearson had discovered something else that changed the game during his 6th shot. A Japanese soldier had found shelter behind a thick tree trunk that would have stopped any rifle bullet cold. But the spreading shotgun pellets weren't constrained by that thinking. They curved around the obstacle and struck the enemy from angles no direct fire could ever reach. The 19-year-old private began experimenting with this deliberately, aiming at spots that let the pellets bounce and ricochet through the jungle canopy to strike targets hidden behind cover. The thick, humid air hanging over everything, which had caused nothing but headaches for American weapons throughout the Solomon Islands, affected this shotgun differently than anyone had expected. While rifle barrels needed constant scrubbing just to stay accurate, this shotgun's performance actually seemed to improve in the wet, moisture-soaked jungle air. The atmospheric conditions that scattered rifle fire across long distances had almost no effect on shotgun pellet patterns at close range. McKinley's weapon ran more reliably than his M1 had during earlier patrols in similar conditions. Corporal Daniels had spent 3 solid weeks mastering the pump-action mechanism, and now his hands moved through the motions without any conscious thought. He could cycle shells and keep firing while shifting between defensive positions without missing a beat. The veteran Marine had worked out that his sustained rate of fire hit nearly 3 rounds every minute. Way faster than bolt-action rifles and matching what you'd get from semi-automatic weapons. And here was the thing that really mattered. At the close ranges where jungle fighting happened, each round absolutely devastated whatever it hit. The sound these shotguns made, kane, created real problems for the Japanese soldiers, who'd trained their entire lives recognizing the specific crack and boom of American rifles. McKinley could hear enemy voices shouting commands back in their formation, but the orders sounded confused and uncertain. They'd learned to recognize the 8-round magazine ejection on the M1 Garand, timing their final charges to hit when Americans were reloading and vulnerable. But this continuous thundering roar from the shotguns demolished their timing and wiped out the audio signals they used to coordinate their attacks. By his 10th shot, McKinley realized he was holding something revolutionary. Everything the Marine Corps analysts had predicted about this weapon seemed to be coming true, and then some. The thick brush that turned rifle engagements into 50-yard affairs was actually perfect territory for shotguns. The gun that looked outdated compared to modern rifles turned out to be exactly what you needed in places where Americans fought their most desperate struggles. Harrison had already fired 15 rounds and figured out that reloading with shotgun shells worked differently than managing those 8-round rifle clips. The shells were bigger and harder to handle, but the actual reloading process was faster and simpler. He got into a rhythm of firing 3 shots, sliding in 2 fresh shells, and continuing the fight. This method kept his weapon feeding rounds while making sure he never ran completely dry at the worst possible moment. The banzai charge that had seemed impossible to stop from 400 yards away started falling apart under the concentrated shotgun fire. Individual Japanese soldiers kept coming forward with fanatical courage, but their organized formation shattered into scattered groups struggling through increasingly deadly terrain. McKinley's squad had just proven that everything everyone thought they knew about infantry weapons was wrong. Out here in the dense Pacific jungles, this supposedly outdated shotgun had become the single most effective weapon for breaking up enemy assaults, turning what should have been desperate last-ditch defenses into controlled, organized victories. The data Pearson collected after the February 20th fight challenged every assumption military planners held about how weapons performed in jungle warfare. McKinley's report documented 23 confirmed enemy killed from a 12-man squad firing shotguns compared to the typical 4 to 6 kills per squad using standard rifles. The whole thing lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds from that first shot to the moment the enemy broke and withdrew, dramatically shorter than the 8 to 12 minutes typical rifle-based defenses usually took. What really shocked everyone was the casualty count on the American side: 0 killed and 2 lightly wounded. This completely flipped the casualty ratios that had plagued American forces across the entire Solomon Islands campaign. Pearson saw immediately what these numbers meant. Standard Marine training said rifle fire should start at maximum effective range, usually 200 to 300 yards in open country. Jungle warfare cut that down to 50 yards or less, leaving only 15 to 20 seconds before enemy forces reached your position. The M1 Garand's 8-round capacity let experienced riflemen get off 6 or 7 careful shots during that critical window, assuming everything went perfectly and the gun didn't jam. McKinley's squad had demonstrated that shotguns could deliver 20 to 25 effective shots per man in that same time frame, with each shot creating multiple impacts across the target area. The analysis went beyond just counting bullets. Pearson's staff reviewed ammunition consumption records from earlier engagements and found that rifle-equipped squads typically burned through 60 to 80 rounds per enemy soldier killed during banzai charge situations. McKinley's squad had used only 12 shotgun shells per casualty, with each shell carrying 9 pellets. The ammunition efficiency numbers showed dramatic improvement, and that mattered enormously given how impossible it was to resupply forward positions deep in the jungle. Corporal Daniels offered critical insights into how the weapon actually performed under real combat stress. His experience with both rifles and shotguns during the same fight gave him direct comparison of how they felt and functioned. The pump-action mechanism was more intuitive under extreme pressure than wrestling with bolt handles or swapping out clips. Daniels said his hands adapted to the shotgun within the first 10 rounds, something that had taken months to achieve with rifles. The weapon operated consistently even with adrenaline flooding his system and his fine motor skills deteriorating. Medical reports from the engagement revealed additional advantages to using shotguns. Japanese soldiers hit by rifle fire usually stayed dangerous for several seconds after being struck, long enough to reach American positions with bayonets or explosive charges. Shotgun victims showed immediate incapacitation in 93% of cases. Navy corpsmen figured this came from the multiple wound channels the scattered pellets created, disrupting the nervous system more effectively than a single bullet wound. Harrison's detailed breakdown of his reloading techniques during the fight provided tactical information that influenced how Marines trained afterward. The private had successfully reloaded his weapon 7 times during the engagement, keeping continuous fire going by coordinating his ammunition changes with the Marines beside him. His method of loading 2 shells after every 3rd shot kept his weapon functioning while ensuring maximum sustained firepower. This approach proved better than the standard method of running the magazine dry before reloading, especially when facing human wave attacks that never gave you a break. The psychological impact of shotgun fire surprised everyone during interviews with captured Japanese soldiers. Prisoners reported that the distinctive sound of the pump-action cycling created panic in their formation because the weapon reminded them of American police and gangster movies that had circulated in Japan before the war. The thunderous blast of 12-gauge shells at close range created auditory shock effects that broke down communication and coordination within attacking units. Some prisoners described encounters with what sounded like thunder guns, firing continuously without stopping to reload. Pearson's analysis of the terrain showed why shotguns worked so well in Pacific conditions. The dense vegetation that covered most engagement areas created natural bottlenecks that channeled attacking forces along predictable routes. Shotgun patterns spread to about 10 feet in diameter at 30 yards, perfectly matching these terrain-imposed killing zones. The weapon's effectiveness actually increased in jungle conditions, completely opposite to conventional thinking that preferred rifle accuracy and range. Jungle warfare had accidentally created the ideal environment for shotguns, despite the weapon originally being designed for trench warfare. 25 years earlier, the way trench guns handled tropical conditions surprised both Marines and their maintenance personnel. While rifle barrels needed daily cleaning to keep shooting straight, shotgun performance stayed consistent regardless of built-up fouling. The larger bore diameter and lower pressures from 12-gauge ammunition were more forgiving of humidity, mud, and debris that ruined smaller caliber weapons. Pearson reported that his weapon kept working throughout the entire engagement, even after being dropped in muddy water during the initial setup. Distributing shotguns across the entire force presented logistical complications and opportunities alike. 12-gauge ammunition weighed considerably more than rifle cartridges, limiting how many rounds each Marine could pack. But the improved effectiveness per round helped make up for that disadvantage. Pearson calculated that a Marine carrying 25 shotgun shells had equivalent firepower to a rifleman carrying 40 to 50 rounds, while carrying approximately the same total weight. The reduced ammunition needs also made supplying units operating far away from established supply bases considerably easier. Teaching Marines to use shotguns effectively meant completely rewriting how they trained. Traditional rifle instruction stressed precision, breathing techniques, and single-shot accuracy at distant ranges. Shotgun tactics required quick target identification, instinctive pointing, and rapid sustained fire at close quarters. Daniels stepped forward to create training programs that could prepare Marines for this different approach within the limited timeframes between combat operations. Intercepted Japanese documents revealed that enemy commanders had begun modifying their banzai charge tactics to counter American rifles. Enemy units had figured out how to exploit the 8-round limit of M1 rifles, launching their final assaults when Americans were busy reloading. Pump-action shotguns, with their continuous fire capability, eliminated that advantage, forcing Japanese forces to completely rethink close assault operations. By March 1st, Pearson had accumulated enough information to push for immediate wider distribution of shotguns throughout the entire 1st Marine Division. His recommendation to higher command included detailed ammunition usage analyses, improved casualty statistics, and specific tactical employment guidance. The weapon military leadership had deemed obsolete for modern combat had become the most effective tool for stopping enemy charges in jungle conditions, fundamentally shifting the tactical advantage to defending American forces. The torrential monsoon rains, starting March 15th, exposed the first serious problem with the shotgun's jungle reliability. McKinley discovered this during a standard patrol when his weapon jammed on a spent shell, leaving him temporarily defenseless while Japanese snipers focused fire on his location. The pump mechanism that had worked flawlessly during the February fight now struggled against relentless moisture seeping into every opening and seal. After 48 hours of constant rain, half the shotguns in his squad were experiencing occasional malfunctions that threatened to eliminate their tactical advantage. Harrison found himself dealing with mechanical failures he'd never encountered during training. Steel parts of the pump mechanism showed corrosion despite regular cleaning, and the wooden stock began swelling from absorbing moisture. His weapon jammed twice during a night ambush on March 18th, forcing him to switch to his backup pistol while enemy soldiers advanced within grenade-throwing distance. The dependability that had made shotguns so effective was turning fragile against environmental conditions the weapon had never been designed to handle. Corporal Daniels started making field modifications that broke standard Marine maintenance rules but became necessary just to keep fighting. Using whatever tools and spare parts he could scavenge from damaged weapons, He took shotguns apart to find exactly which components were suffering from the humidity. The extractor mechanism turned out to be the most vulnerable component, followed by the trigger group assembly connected to the magazine tube spring. Daniels observed that adding too much lubricant actually made things worse, not better. The grease and oil trapped dust and sand particles that fouled the moving parts and gummed up the works. Beyond the mechanical issues, ammunition itself presented serious problems. During the tropical monsoon season, shotgun shells started breaking down after just 2 weeks of exposure. The wax coating on the cardboard boxes couldn't hold back the moisture. When shells got wet, they fired inconsistently, and the pellet spread became unpredictable and dangerous. McKinley's squad experienced shell failures that were nothing short of catastrophic during one brutal firefight. One round produced barely a whisper, and the pellets only traveled 15 yards instead of the 50 they should have covered. When ammunition failed, men died. That timing couldn't have been worse, with Lieutenant Colonel Pearson now facing decisions that could sink the entire shotgun program. Reports were flooding in from units across the theater, describing the same nightmare: mechanical breakdowns and ammunition failures climbing to 23% in sustained wet operations. The weapon that had transformed close-quarters combat was becoming a liability precisely when Marines needed firepower they could depend on. Pearson's staff had already tallied 4 Marine deaths from weapon failures when the guns stopped working during enemy contact. Experienced men like Daniels started spreading improvised solutions through the ranks, passing techniques from squad to squad without waiting for official approval. Marines discovered that beeswax obtained from island sources combined with diverted petroleum products from vehicle maintenance improved performance dramatically, but these field fixes created a nightmare for standardization and keeping weapons maintained. Every squad ended up doing things slightly differently. What worked for McKinley's unit might not work for another. This meant centralized training and supply became nearly impossible. McKinley struggled to maintain his weapon following the official manual, but those procedures were designed for rifles and different climates entirely. The prescribed lubricants attracted moisture like a magnet instead of repelling it. After every patrol, complete disassembly and thorough cleaning became mandatory. The hours spent taking the gun apart, cleaning each component, and reassembling it left Marines exhausted during moments when they should have been resting and preparing for the next operation. Time at the gun bench was time they couldn't spend recovering. Harrison solved the problem by creating a rotation system, where half the squad's weapons stayed in service while the other half dried out and underwent maintenance. This meant carrying double the weapons, which created massive supply headaches for squads operating away from base camps. The extra weight cut into ammunition they could carry and reduced their mobility in the jungle. The psychological damage from weapon failures went deeper than just mechanical problems. Marines who had grown to trust their shotgun's stopping power now carried a nagging fear that the gun might jam at the worst possible moment. Stress levels climbed noticeably as men started carrying backup weapons despite the added burden, trying to hedge their bets against equipment failure. That morale hit undermined much of what had made the shotgun program successful in the first place. Supply challenges made things worse because 12-gauge ammunition followed different logistics routes than rifle cartridges. When weather delayed shipments or damaged them in transit, Marines found themselves carefully counting every shell while Japanese attacks continued without pause. McKinley's squad spent 6 grueling days in late March operating with minimal ammunition, rationing shells so strictly they had to keep engagement ranges short and avoid patrols that might turn into prolonged firefights. Daniels became increasingly valuable as other units turned to him for solutions. The veteran corporal began teaching informal classes on maintenance techniques, sharing knowledge that existed nowhere in official manuals. His reputation grew so significant that Pearson started consulting him directly on equipment matters, reaching around normal chain of command to access practical combat-tested knowledge. The real problem extended beyond just weapons and ammunition. Equipment designed for European fighting simply wasn't built to handle the Pacific. The crushing humidity, wild temperature swings, and corrosive salt air created problems nobody had anticipated during peacetime testing. McKinley's struggles mirrored the larger adaptation challenge facing American forces operating in completely unfamiliar territory. By month's end, field reports showed that shotguns that received proper maintenance kept performing well despite their problems. Units that successfully adapted their cleaning procedures continued outperforming rifle-armed troops during Japanese charges. But this advantage now depended on individual Marines being technically skilled. Instead of following standardized procedures everyone could apply equally. Different units started seeing different results based on how competent their personnel were. Marine Corps leadership reached a crossroads where they had to choose between scrapping a weapon that gave them real tactical advantages or accepting the operational complications and resources needed to keep it running in the field. McKinley's squad had proven the shotgun could work if properly supported, but that support required expertise and material not available everywhere. Everything hinged on whether logistical sustainability could match battlefield effectiveness. The black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima changed everything. McKinley's boots crunched across the gritty surface as his squad moved toward the honeycomb of Japanese bunkers buried deep in the island's interior. The dense jungle that had defined Pacific fighting for 2 years disappeared, replaced by sulfur springs, jagged rock outcroppings, and concrete fortifications that seemed pulled straight from the earth itself. Jungle tactics weren't going to work here. The first sign came during the February landing, when Harrison fought to keep his weapon clean against the volcanic ash infiltrating every mechanism despite protective coverings. The fine gray particles were worse than humidity. They mixed with lubricants into an abrasive paste that ground between moving parts. When Harrison cycled the pump action after hitting the beach, he heard a grinding sound that made his stomach drop. The gun that survived months of tropical hell was being defeated by terrain nobody trained for. Pearson's reconnaissance showed why shotguns might actually become more valuable on Iwo Jima than anywhere else. The Japanese had abandoned mass banzai charges and dug in instead, creating narrow underground passages and reinforced bunkers that funneled American attacks into tight corridors, barely wide enough for single file. Engagement distances would be 5 to 15 yards at most. Perfect range for shotgun effectiveness. The weapon built for trench warfare in France now faced conditions almost identical to what its inventors originally intended. On March 2nd, Corporal Daniels led the first underground assault, clearing a tunnel complex holding approximately 30 Japanese defenders. The concrete passages measured 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, dimensions that made rifles nearly impossible to maneuver but favored the compact pump-action shotgun profile. Daniels carried 40 rounds of double-aught buckshot chosen specifically for close-quarters penetration. Each shell packed 12 pellets capable of defeating light armor at arm's length. The confined space amplified everything about shotgun use. The thunderous blast of 12-gauge shells in concrete tunnels created acoustic shockwaves that stunned Japanese defenders and disrupted their coordination. Daniels noticed enemies often became disoriented after the first shot, giving American forces precious seconds to advance. But that same noise proved nearly unbearable for attacking Marines, pushing them toward hearing damage that demanded changes to standard assault procedures. McKinley discovered bunker clearing required different ammunition than jungle fighting. Standard buckshot couldn't penetrate the reinforced concrete and steel plate barriers Japanese engineers built into their positions. The squad switched to specialized breaching rounds loaded with hardened steel projectiles designed to punch through fortified materials. These shells carried only 6 pellets instead of 9, but provided penetration they desperately needed against substantial enemy cover. The psychological impact of shotgun fire in bunkers proved particularly devastating. Japanese defenders trapped underground with no escape routes often surrendered or stopped fighting after hearing the first few shotgun blasts. Harrison reported that enemies realized fighting in those confined spaces made escape impossible once American forces sealed tunnel entrances with concentrated fire. The claustrophobic environment the Japanese had designed to their advantage became a killing ground where American firepower dominated. Ammunition usage during bunker operations skyrocketed beyond any previous estimates. McKinley's squad expended an average of 60 rounds per cleared position compared to 25 rounds during jungle engagements. The intensity of underground fighting and the need to maintain constant suppressive fire while pushing through tunnel networks drove consumption up dramatically. Supply lines already struggling to support shotgun ammunition faced even greater pressure. Daniels refined tactics for navigating Japanese tunnel networks, combining lessons from both jungle warfare and urban combat. His approach emphasized quick movement between firing positions and using shotgun patterns to cover multiple directions simultaneously. The veteran corporal discovered that pellets ricocheting off concrete passages often struck enemies who thought they had adequate cover, creating lethal effects exceeding the weapon's theoretical capabilities. Treating shotgun wounds in underground environments presented medical challenges that complicated casualty evacuation and required different protocols than standard care. Navy corpsmen reported that blast effects in confined spaces produced injuries unlike anything seen in open terrain, with acoustic trauma becoming as significant as actual projectile wounds. The weapon's extraordinary effectiveness at stopping attacks created treatment difficulties that strained medical resources. Harrison's experience showed the importance of combined arms. While shotguns dominated close quarters, they couldn't suppress positions at distance or penetrate heavy barriers. His squad developed techniques employing rifles for precision fire and shotguns for final assault phases, leveraging each weapon's strengths while compensating for weaknesses. The volcanic environment created maintenance problems completely different from jungle conditions, but equally demanding. Sulfur compounds corroded metal at accelerated rates, while ash acted as an abrasive, wearing down components. McKinley's weapon needed complete cleaning after every operation, with replacement parts becoming critical supply items requiring priority allocation. Intelligence suggested Japanese commanders adapted their tunnel defense specifically to counter American shotgun tactics, using longer passages exceeding effective shotgun range and barriers designed to fragment pellet patterns. American assault teams developed counter-tactics, restoring their underground advantages. By March 15th, casualty reports showed shotgun-equipped units suffering significantly lower losses during bunker operations compared to rifle-armed forces. McKinley's squad participated in 14 tunnel assaults with 0 fatalities and only 3 minor wounded. Statistics sharply contrasting with typical heavy casualties during fortified position attacks. The weapon revolutionizing jungle warfare proved equally transformative in Iwo Jima's urban combat environment. Success during bunker operations created demand exceeding available supply. Pearson found himself rationing weapons among competing units, each claiming their missions needed shotguns most. The forgotten relic of the First World War had become one of the most sought-after weapons in the entire Pacific theater. Its effectiveness proven across multiple combat environments its designers never imagined.